Ruth Hummel from the Plainville Historic Center, 29 Pierce Street, right across the street from the museum, from the Nutmeg TV. Today we're going to be doing one of a series of programs called Plainville, Past and Present, and today's show is about the 7 Trumbull brothers. You didn't know there were 7, did you? They all amounted to important people, interesting people. And Hugh, how about filling us in a little background on the family to start with?
Well, our branch of the family started with Hugh and Mary Trumbull. They were born originally in the area of Edinburgh, Scotland, but immigrated to the United States in 1872 by way of Northern Ireland. Their first son was John Trumbull, and you have to realize that the era we're talking about now is just after the American Civil War. So they've immigrated to the United States and having the first son, John Trumbull, 1873.
And we have this wonderful picture of the whole group, the 7 boys and the father and the mother, which is just absolutely perfect for people doing genealogy research. And John is the top boy on the left as you look at the picture. John later on married Maud Usher, who was also from an old family in Plainville, and they built a house on the corner of Route 10 and 372, or close to the corner. And we see their picture of their house here. I think at this point that I should introduce my guests for the day. And we start over here with Martha Kellum Kuchar. And Martha, what is your relationship to the Trumbull family?
My grandfather was Henry Trumbull.
And you remember visiting Henry at his
Yes.
home, and we're going to talk about that in a little while. Martha runs the beautiful Artisans Marketplace down on East Street. And it's interesting to know her husband built the building, which is fabulous.
Sure did.
And over here we have Doris Trumbull Bedard. And Doris, your relationship?
My father was Frank, the second son.
And we feel that Frank maybe had more fun than any of the Trumbull brothers combined, right?
And you expect me to carry on the
That's
tradition.
Right. We would expect nothing less from you, Doris. Yeah. And Hugh is also a relative of the Trumbulls, and it's interesting to note that Hugh is one of a lot of Hugh Trumbulls, right?
We recycled that name a few
You
times.
really recycle those names. And your relationship to the family is?
I'm related to George Ray. George Ray was my grandfather.
Grandfather. Mm-hmm.
The youngest brother.
Of the 7 brothers, right.
So we're going to talk about these brothers and see what their contribution was, not only to local history, but also to the electrical business and to several very surprising enterprises. And we start with John. John, of course, became governor of the state of Connecticut. He's the best known of the brothers, and probably the person that we have the most information on at the Historic Center of anyone in the town of Plainville. John was very media conscious. He was probably the first person to really use the media, the print and early radio, to better and forward his interests, which were many, not only business but political and early aviation. John lived on a number of farms with his family, with his father and mother and brothers, and Hugh Trumbull never owned a farm in Plainville, but he rented farms, and this went along with a tenant farmer system in the British Isles from whence the family came. Three farms for sure we know that they rented, and it was always John, as the older son's job, to take the cream to market before he went to school in the morning, and he and the old horse had to go out and battle snow and sleet, and just like the mailman, the cream had to go through. And Hugh, his first job was quite interesting.
Well, I think all of the brothers, we're going to find out, had an interest in electricity. John, the oldest brother, started really as an apprentice in the Eddy Electric Company in Windsor, right down the road. He developed an interest in electrical engines and generators and the electrical equipment of that day, which would absolutely interest the other brothers, as we'll see as we talk about them.
And they all trained as electricians early on, didn't they?
Yes, they did.
Yeah, it was very interesting. In 1899, when John was only 26, he and Henry purchased a building in Plainville for $80 called the Old Chuck Shop. And Hugh informed me today that a chuck is a type of a tool. I thought it was an animal with a lot of fur, but he got me straightened out. This business grew, and as the business grew, so did the buildings grow. And we see in the series of pictures, first the chuck shop, then the chuck shop with a second floor, and finally the first of many brick buildings. If you drive on Woodford Avenue, which is Route 72 today, 372, you'll see the modern General Electric company, which has, of course, taken over Trumbull Electric, and it's a big, fairly modern building. In this wonderful display photograph that we have of the boys traveling with an electrical switch displayed probably to a convention, we see John in the center, and he's always the one with his hat cocked a little bit and he's camera ready at all times. So well did John present his ideas on business, bettering the business and industrial fields in Connecticut and manufacturing, that he was shortly tapped to become a politician, and he rose very rapidly through the ranks, becoming elected governor of the state of Connecticut in 1925. And we see Governor and Mrs. Trumbull here at the inauguration ball in 1928, which was another term. Notice the clothing of the day, very flapper-esque, and I believe that's young Mr. Coolidge in the center, and we're going to hear more about young Mr. Coolidge as we progress with our show today. John was the first person to use aviation as a forwarding device for his many interests, and he became known as the Flying Governor. He would fly to conventions and meetings, and on all his correspondence he was noted as the Flying Governor. He had a lot of crashes, and the people of Connecticut became very concerned about the safety of their governor. And we get silly over one picture that we're not showing today. I wish we had shown it. And John is going up in an experimental glider, and he's wearing spats, and somehow it just doesn't go. He crashed, by the way. But the people did get very concerned about his safety and demanded that he be less experimental and less dynamic in some of his endeavors in the air. He received his license at the age of 51, which is remarkable in itself. In Plainville, we had a lot of little airstrips because Plainville was the center of development of a lot of aeronautical techniques and small airplanes. In fact, our first flight out of Plainville was 1911, not long after the Wright brothers. And the one that the governor chose to use was down on the property that now houses the Plainville High School on East Street, and we show a picture of what it looks like today.
Ruth, one of the things that might be interesting is how the Trumbull and Coolidge families got together.
Yes, that's a good story, Hugh.
It turned out that in those days, political campaigning was often done by train. And to be President Coolidge was campaigning by train and asked Governor Trumbull and his family to join them. Well, it was on that campaigning train ride that son of President Coolidge, John Coolidge, and Florence Trumbull, John Trumbull's oldest daughter, met and later married.
Yep, the romance struck.
Oh,
right
yeah.
on the train. I can see Cal Coolidge out on the back platform of that train telling people he didn't wish to speak, because that's what he always said. Yes, that was a fantastic wedding. It was one of the few times when a governor's daughter married a president's son, and it really put the town of Plainville, Connecticut on the map. Planes came into that little airstrip that we just showed. It was just chock-a-block full of people coming in from out of state for the wedding, and the wedding was really a gala event, and the town was in total gridlock. You could not move on the streets of Plainville. Cal Coolidge stood in the receiving line, and Doris, you have a little comment about that.
Well, it seems that when my mother went through the receiving line, all she got was like a, and then they passed him. You know,
literally pushed her.
Because there was something under the rug.
Right. The photographers and the reporters had wanted to get a quote from Cal, and he had refused them. Hated to have his picture taken. Hated to talk. What they did is they hid a microphone under the rugs, and of course the rugs covered the grass so their beautiful shoes of the ladies wouldn't be stained. And he discovered the microphone, and I guess he just clammed right up and wouldn't talk to anybody.
I guess that's when
your mother got pushed along.
She didn't even get a shake. All she goes like that.
And yet in that receiving line, we see everybody else smiling and having a wonderful time, and poor Cal Coolidge just not having a good time. Now, your mother was an attendant at that wedding, wasn't she?
Oh, she was?
Yes.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Beautiful picture of Esther Kellum with her big hat and the beautiful dress.
Yes.
Yeah. I wish that we had one of those attendant's dresses, but we do have Florence's gown at the Historic Center, and we've shown that in a couple of wedding gown displays. And we even have a piece of her wedding cake. It's like something you would find in a pyramid, Hugh. It's a tiny little box, and it's wrapped in early foil, and foil wasn't yet in common use in households. And yet they called it tinfoil then, and in a little box with a monogram on it, and we show you a picture of that. But it's wonderful that we do have these souvenirs of that family. Now we skip up to 1969, and of course, in the meantime, Maud and John had built a beautiful mansion on Farmington Avenue, known all over for its beautiful appearance. He also had a hunting lodge in Maine, and he would winter in Florida. After his death, the Army bomb squad used that mansion for a while, strangely enough. But in 1969...
I thought it was a doctor's office.
It was a doctor's,
doctor's office.
and it was apartments at
Yeah,
one time.
yeah.
But the bomb squad stands out somehow. In 1969, the town of Plainville was looking for a site for a new town hall. And the Historical Society had been formed that year for our town's 100th birthday, and we went in where they say, you know, you go in where angels fear to tread. And we held an open house at the mansion, and we garnered a lot of support from the town. The town voted to buy it as the front of the town hall to build an annex on the back. Next month, there was a political upheaval, and the new party was elected, and they immediately rescinded it, and that was the death knell of the mansion. We show you a picture here of some of the desecration that was done to the mansion when the Vandals moved in. Before the final blow came and the bulldozers moved in, I went in and rescued something that Doris has.
Well, one of the first times I came, Ruth was very kind, and she gave me a piece of Uncle John's mansion, and I have it at my house. And my daughter, who lives in Seattle, Washington, wants it very badly because she would like to put a marker on it, you know, of some sort.
So here's a piece of the governor's mansion from Plainville, Connecticut, going out to the West Coast. And I have to say that the bulldozer operator that day did not have kind words for me. I can't understand why he was upset with me. But John and Maud certainly wrote a very interesting and exciting chapter, not only in the manufacturing history of our town, but also in the people history of our town. And started, Hugh hates to have me say dynasty, but certainly started a very interesting family. And next we're going to visit.
Henry Trumbull was the second of the brothers. Henry was born in 1875, and he's shown in the center of this family picture. He first married Nettie Northrup in 1903. They had one daughter, Esther Trumbull Kellum.
And we have a wonderful picture of her here.
Okay, great. And we have a representative of Esther, Martha. And later married a Florence White. Martha, you want to tell us a little bit about the schools in those days?
Well, all 7 brothers were self-educated and only went to the 8th grade, I'm told. I guess that's as far as anyone
That's as
went
far
at
as the
that
school
time.
system went
Yeah.
at Plainville.
And during the blizzard of '88, the 7 brothers all went off to school, and they never returned home for 3 days. Their mother never knew
She
where
must
they
have been
were.
worried sick.
It had to be very hard, I would think, yeah.
And I understand they were put up with other children at a home across the street from the school.
I had never heard that
Yeah,
part of it.
we know the family's name, and neighbors, close neighbors, would bring in food and blankets and keep the children warm because it was a desperate time.
Henry was also an apprentice at Eddy Electric down in Windsor, as was John, and served that apprenticeship, getting into the electrical trade. And of course that led, over a period of time, to forming what became known as Trumbull Electric Manufacturing Company with his brother John. Henry served as the secretary and treasurer of Trumbull Electric for many years. It was also known as Circle T because the symbol of the electric company was a circle with a T, very simple logo. So it's always Trumbull and Trumbull Electric and Circle T. For our discussion here, we may want to call it the Plainville Electric Company because we're going to talk about a couple of other electric companies
It gets pretty complicated.
as we go along. But anyway, this was centered in Plainville. I've been in business for many years, and I know that starting a business is not all that easy. And one of the problems that the brothers had, for example, was credit early on with the company. There's a story about their brass provider. Brass was a key part of electrical equipment in those days. Allowed them a line of credit of $5.
You could probably get a lot of brass, though, for $5.
Might have in those days, but certainly seems strange to us today. Henry and the other corporate officers took turns cleaning the boilers, shoveling the snow. One of the things that they did to keep warm in the wintertime while they were pulling night duty and stoking the boilers was to box. They were amateur boxers, and they boxed each other just to keep active during the course of the night. But of course, they had lots of farm chores as well with the family farm. So really, Henry had a varied life of business, farming, banking, manufacturing, and all those kinds of activities. One of the connections he was a superintendent of the trolley system. But we don't know what trolley system, because there were apparently, what,
There
four
were
of them?
4 different lines in Plainville, yeah.
In the Plainville area.
And in 1911, he became ill with TB. We had to move to Asheville, North Carolina for 2 years. Took my mother and grandmother and moved them out there. And he was in the sanitarium, and they had a home there. And when he came back is when he started the farm, kind of because of his health, backed out of the manufacturing business and started Pinnacle Rock Farm.
And people who have lived in Plainville for a long time know that that was where he developed strains of Ayrshire and Jersey cows and improved their milk production. And he supplied milk locally and also in the towns around us. And for a while he was touting the wonderful potential of unpasteurized milk as a natural food. Then he did a sharp turnaround and was instrumental in inventing an electrical machine for pasteurizing milk. So there was a big change of idea there. During the Depression, he was known for his kindness to the people in town, and he made cordwood and potatoes and apples and things available to people from the farm. He also built a wonderful mansion that you girls remember visiting.
Oh, yes.
In 1912, it was a Spanish style on the corner of 372 and 10. And there was a wonderful collection in that mansion.
It was lusterware was my grandmother's collection, and it was huge.
Oh, and it went all the way around her whole dining. Oh,
There were shelves they had built, and it was various shapes.
superior collection.
Now, lusterware was a kind of china?
It was highly
Yeah.
collectible
Yeah,
in those
yeah,
days.
but it still is.
Yes, still is. I'm
And
sure.
you have some pictures
have
of
a few-
this.
yeah, I
You
have
got
a
a few
whole-
pieces.
Pictures, and I have
Oh,
a
that's
whole
wonderful.
catalog of what she
Yeah,
had.
that's marvelous.
A few pieces.
Now, as age caught up with Henry, it was decided to sell off the herds, and the first auction was the Ayrshires, but it was the nationally advertised auction of his jerseys that brought breeders of Jersey cows from all over the country, and so Plainville stock actually went to embellish the herds of many, many farms. We have a picture of Henry sitting under the tent at this huge event, and you can see the old gentleman is very sad. It's the end of an era for him, and an end of the era for Pinnacle Farm, because after that it was developed for housing. And we do have a photograph of Charles Haney, who was an associate of theirs, and John and Henry taken the day of the auction. And it's the last we have of the two Trumbull brothers, and John would be gone in 8 years, and Henry would be gone in 9, and it was truly the end of an era, wasn't it?
I think so. That really brings us to our third of the Trumbull brothers. This is Frank Samuel Trumbull, and Frank is shown at the right of the top row in the picture. Frank was born in 1876 and initially married Esther Kramer in 1908. Esther was a Plainville girl. And on her death, later married Dot Boyson in 1929. They had 3 daughters, Doris being the middle of the 3 daughters. And Ruth, why don't you tell us a little bit about Frank and that family?
Okay, as a child, he had TB, I understand. Now, it's generally assumed by we who have done research here that all the brothers had TB at one time
guess so,
or another.
yeah, I guess so.
And the thought might be that you had a theory on that.
Well, this was my idea. The fact that they lived on farms, that there's a possibility that's where they picked it up from the cows.
From the unpasteurized milk.
So maybe that's why
Yeah.
Uncle Henry got
Could be,
interested
yeah.
in the pasturing.
Now, as a young man, Frank was badly burned as an electrician when a lamp exploded. But you said you never remember
No, I
any
never saw any
scars.
scars on him.
Yeah, well, he was very lucky. Then he became a traveling salesman for the Trumbull Electric Company and did a lot on the West Coast,
Yeah.
which led to his
He
family.
moved. Yeah, they moved out there to San Francisco.
The family moved out there so it would be easier for him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he did a lot in Cuba. In 1905, we have a news clipping saying he took a lot of orders in Cuba. Your dad had a very special interest that was unique to him as far as fun went.
Oh, well, he really liked horses and he loved horse racing, and so he had a string of horses. And the most famous one, I guess, is called the fop. I think we have a picture.
FOP.
FOP.
Yeah.
Fop.
name for
And
a
we
horse.
do have a beautiful picture of it.
And,
yeah.
and the thing was, when they went to the racetrack, that when either my mother or my father, whoever was the highest winner that day, would have to pay, buy dinner that night. So if my mother won, then she would buy dinner, or my father won, then he would pay. So we looked forward to them going to
Sounds
the
like
racetrack.
they had a lot of fun. Now, at this point, you want to talk about, is this where you want to talk about the lawsuits?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think it's. Why don't we digress just a minute? We've talked about the first three Trumbull brothers, and they were the ones that really most involved in the big Trumbull Electric Company, Plainville, Connecticut. So picture the three brothers in Plainville, Trumbull Electric up and running. Now we've got four more brothers. What are they doing? Well, not to be outdone by the older brothers, they actually went, all four of the younger brothers went to Bantam, Connecticut, where they founded another electrical company. This company was called Connecticut Electric Manufacturing Company. But for our purposes, let's just call it the Bantam Electric Company, because this really gets a little confusing after a while. So I've got the older brothers in Plainville, Trumbull Electric, four younger brothers in Bantam. Not long after this all got going, there was a lawsuit. Older brothers against younger brothers. And at this time, this was the largest industrial lawsuit in the state of Connecticut up until that time. It was solved in a very interesting way. The younger brothers were represented with what turned out to be an excellent lawyer named Thomas Ryan from Litchfield, Connecticut. Well, in those days, not being as ecologically interested as we are today, they actually went, and when they swept up at the end of the day, they actually threw the trash out the back window of the plant. And this is the plant in Bantam, Connecticut. It's a brick building. And this pile of sweepings, if you will, grew out behind the plant. Well, lawyer Ryan went into the pile of sweepings and found an electrical device in the pile which happened to be the key to solving this lawsuit. It was a patent infringement lawsuit, older against younger, but what Ryan found out there in the sweepings pile in Bantam turned the case in favor of the younger brothers, and they won. Older brothers wound up paying all the costs of the litigation and so forth.
And what did their mother insist on?
Well, during this background of legal activity, Mary Trumbull, mother of this gang, when she said, "Come to Sunday dinner," they did. And they all sat around as a family, Sunday dinner, with a raging lawsuit in the background.
That was a great story about the dinner party. And you remember going to the mansion, the two different mansions for dinner parties or dinners.
Oh, yes. And then we would go in and have, I guess it was like the library when we would visit Uncle John, and he would smoke his cigars. And then there were three of us, so we each take turns, and he'd give us the ring from the cigar, and then he would, blow the rings.
Yeah.
That was my fondest memory of Uncle John, and then going over to Uncle Henry's and seeing all the beautiful lusterware that they had.
Now, when you visited John, was Mary living with John at that time?
Oh, no.
Mary still had her house on Broad Street.
Oh, no, Mary had passed away by then. No.
I see, because I thought at one time I had read that Mary lived with John for a short
Oh, yes,
time.
yeah.
Okay, and we're talking about Mary, his mother.
Yes.
Okay, and you certainly remember both mansions.
Oh, yes, I do. I would spend a lot of time with my
Yeah, and
grandfather.
anything particular stand out in your mind besides the lusterware collection?
Nothing. It was just a beautiful.
Didn't you
place.
listen to the radio in the back library?
Oh, yes. And eventually they did get a TV.
That's how they entertained us when we were little, because the adults had to talk, so they put the radio on. It was a magic radio.
And everybody sat and looked at the radio.
I guess so. I
Yeah,
don't know.
it was the funny thing. You couldn't see anything but this radio, but you sat and you looked at the radio. I remember that. Now, as an older lady, Mary went back to Ireland to visit her relatives. She still had folks there. And she took kind of a peculiar thing with her.
Well, my mother said that she took back clothespins. And when I was doing my research, I asked Mr. Cresswell, and I said, why would she take clothespins back? And he said, well, the only thing you knew about clothespins, that the gypsies made them or invented them, because when you go back to Ireland, you see the laundry just put out on bushes. And so he said, well, the only thing he could think of was maybe it was the new ones with the metal
clippers,
clips.
Yeah. You know why people lay their clothes on the green bushes and on the green grass? Because the chlorophyll acts as a bleach.
I wouldn't know that.
Oh, yes.
No, because my girlfriend was there, and she said just recently that when she went back, they were still putting their clothes
But everybody
on
loved the clothespins.
But they like the clothespins.
Isn't that a wonderful story? I love that. Now, we still have other brothers to cover, don't we, Hugh?
Well, I think that brings us to Alexander, the fourth of the brothers. Alex is shown in the family picture as he's second from the left in the front row here.
Aren't we lucky to have that picture? That's a marvelous picture.
And really, it's kind of a family story all in itself in the picture.
Encapsulated, yeah.
It's interesting. Alexander in the family Bible was Hugh Alexander, but I suspect that got confusing in the family, and so he ultimately became Alex.
Oh, that's fine.
And that's another Hugh Trumbull.
That's right, yeah. Alex was born in 1878, and I think that he had some of the same interests as the older brother. Certainly was interested in the electrical things and was part of the startup of the electric company in Bantam. We'll learn later on that he was deeply involved in the Trumbull Car Company. So he also had quite a diverse set of family enterprises.
You know, speaking of diverse family enterprises, did we say that your father ended up with a silver company?
Manchester Silver Company.
Manchester Silver Company, yeah, and that was very diverse from what the other boys were doing. I mean, now we've got a silversmith, we've got car people, we've got all these different electrical manufacturing companies, and this
The governor.
and the governor and his aeronautical exploits. But it just shows what we started to say at the very beginning of the show, that this was a family that really explored a lot of new ground.
Oh, I think so. Let's talk about Alex's interest. I think among the boys, Alex may have been the most mechanically inclined.
Yeah.
As we look at the now the Bantam Electric Company, Alex was in charge of what we'd call today operations. But again, I think he was a device guy, a mechanical kind of guy.
Now, you wouldn't remember him because of the age difference,
I just
right?
remember Uncle Al, but I don't remember.
Yeah, just a vague figure in your
Well,
memory, yeah.
by the time you and I came along, he had a gas station in Stratford, Connecticut.
Why
Right
don't you
near
tell
the-
us about that? Yeah.
Right near. Well, when we were, we'd go visit my grandparents, and then we would go and visit Uncle Al at the gas station, and we would always go by the Sikorsky helicopter plant.
Which, of course, is still there. It's big
Oh,
business.
no, so
Big
it's still
deal.
it's still Sikorsky.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we were
Huge.
fascinated because we would watch these magic machines go up. We were kids.
Yeah.
And then, you spend the time with Uncle Al. So you really didn't. Oh, so
No,
yeah, we
I
used to
never
go
went
visit.
there. I don't remember.
Yeah, we
ever
used to
going
visit
there.
him all the time.
Alex, like his older brothers, was interested in sports, marksmanship, outdoor living, camping, and so forth.
And that's a grand picture of him with John.
Sure is. I think it's one of the best pictures of the brothers in doing the things that they really
Yeah.
like to do. One of the last pictures of Alexander was taken in 1953. This is a picture of the four brothers. Actually, at the time this was taken, the four remaining brothers. He would die just 6 years after this picture was taken. I think that takes us to Jim. Jim was often described by family members as an invalid. I think he was sick a lot of the time.
And do you think that, again, was the TV-related?
Oh, absolutely,
sickness?
yes. Jim was only 36 when he died, and he died in a sanitarium in Saranac Lake, New York. A sanitarium was a place where people could live outdoors and fight the
That was before
diseases.
they had the things that we have now to fight TB. People
That's
just
right,
died
yeah,
of it.
very much so. He married a woman named Alice, and that's about all we know
No
about
children.
her. But no children. And as I said, died in Saranac Lake, New York. And Jim is buried back here in Plainville, right
next
beside
to
his parents.
Right next to his parents.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a lot of Trumbles up in that old West Street Cemetery, cemetery.
Well, we call it the Trumbull Cemetery.
Yeah, right.
Well,
I mean, my family does. Maybe there's other people. The Ushers are buried there.
yes.
Yes.
Maud's family.
Hugh, to get away from the subject of cemeteries, one of my favorite people of all the Trumbull brothers is Isaac, and you called him Ike, right?
The family called him Ike.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was the family name for him. This was Isaac Blair Trumbull now, born in 1872. Ike is shown in the front row of the picture, the family picture, over on the extreme right-hand side. Ike married Bertha Cleveland Ailing of New Haven, and they had one daughter named Priscilla. I think this porch picture again leads us into the story of how Ike fit into the family picture, and that is again interested in electricity. Interestingly enough, he did some work in the 1914-15 time frame. He actually rewired the church and the rectory of the Plainville Congregational Church. So he shared that same interest of the rest of the boys.
He also was instrumental in working on a very famous building in New York State, in New York City too.
Oh, is that right?
The Empire State Building.
He did.
That's in one of their ads, that was one of the buildings that they worked on.
I'm sure Circle T.
Circuits,
and,
and different
was
switches and things.
right.
I think that's very exciting because that was a great Art Deco building, still is.
One of the stories that's interesting to me about Ike is how the brothers, now we're talking about the four younger brothers, happened to come into possession of what became the Trumbull car. Recall that they were in Bantam, in business, electrical business, and Ike was the financial guy in this business. It turned out that a company out in Chicago owed the company a significant debt, and Ike went out there to collect the debt. Well, instead of coming back with cash, he came back with what became the Trumbull cycle and later the Trumbull car.
That's pretty good bartering.
It turned out to be, although the ending wasn't all that great.
Right. Well, he couldn't foresee that at that point.
That was really the beginning of what we all came to know as the Trumbull Motor Car Company of Bridgeport. Now, let me just transition a little bit from Bridgeport. Remember I said the electrical company was in Bantam. It turned out that during this era, the people in Bridgeport, with tax and real estate incentives, enticed the Bantam Electric Company to go to Bridgeport. So imagine this electrical company in Bantam picking up, going to Bridgeport, and it was right about that time that they acquired the rights to the Trumbull car. So the Trumbull car is now always associated with Bridgeport, and that's how that came to be.
Yeah, they couldn't do that today, switch around like that.
Probably not.
With tax constraints and labor constraints.
That's right. Ruth, why don't you tell us the rest of the story about Ike and the Trumbull car?
Well, this little car was a darling little car. In fact, we had two on display at the Plainville Historic Center for a transportation show a few years ago, and we actually have pictures of Martha's grandchildren in the little car. They were little cars. They were little runabout things. Now, there are two that we know of. One is in that Hurrah, a car museum out in, is that Nevada? Mm-hmm. But one is right here in Connecticut in a very famous car collection, and you can go and see it. And that's where we got ours for the loan of that day. There's a couple of different stories about the Trumbull motor car, and the one that I kind of subscribe to is the fact that England, we're talking about 1915, England was looking for chassis, lightweight chassis on which to mount machines to purify water, to get clean water into the men in the trenches during the war. Isaac Trumbull heard about this possible contract, and he very quickly applied for a passport. The family saying, Isaac, don't go. These are bad times. It's troubled times. There's war in Europe. It's very dangerous. Even the Cunard company, the steamship company, was warning people not to travel because it was dangerous. However, the Trumbull family always swore Isaac never heard or never was given a warning. He very hastily made arrangements to ship for England, just barely caught his ship, and we see a picture of his ship going down the ways on its journey. But first, Hugh has a second version, a completely different version of this, and I think it's interesting to explore all these stories before we tell you the ending.
Well, the family story was for many years that there was actually a shipment of Trumbull cars on this ship, the Lusitania, with Ike, headed for England and headed for military use, which, if that were the case, then it would have been contraband.
Contraband, yeah.
Because it was forbidden by the rules of that day. I think the most likely story is illuminated in a letter in later years from Alex to big brother John. And let me just quote from that. Up until that time, about 95% of our cars were being shipped abroad. Shortly after the Lusitania went down, the government put an embargo on all shipments of pleasure cars abroad, and that put us out of business.
There is another version that said there was a large shipment of cars on board,
Yes.
a large number of them. But some of the figures that I have said that only 25 cars a day were being shipped, and they were being shipped out of Boston rather than New York because the tariffs and so forth out of Boston were less. And they were shipped to not only England but Australia and South America. And evidently these cars were small and they were fast and they did well on the undeveloped roads in those countries where a heavier motor car simply wouldn't have been able to get around. And these little cars were available in some beautiful colors. We had, what, a yellow one and a white one at the display.
I believe so, yes.
And we even have records of what Isaac's wife's car color was. We've got wonderful detail about these little cars. Well, anyway, as we see the Lusitania going down the ways, leaving for Europe, and this is the very last journey, of course, and this is the one Isaac was on. Not only was the future and the fate of the Trumbull motor car on that ship, but Isaac Trumbull's fate was also on that ship. A few days later, it was torpedoed by a German sub, went down in 18 minutes. The fact that it went down in 18 minutes tells us there was indeed contraband on there of explosive nature, which led to the quick demise of the ship. It's interesting to note that the last people to be saved and the highest mortality rate was in the first-class cabin people because they were having lunch and they didn't want to be interrupted. They must have had a superb lunch, and they thought it was a false alarm and did not take protective measures to get to the lifeboats, and therefore a lot of them perished. 1,500 people went down, including Isaac. Isaac's body was washed up on the coast of Ireland a few weeks later, sometime later. His funeral was held about 3 weeks later, so we know he wasn't among the first bodies to be recovered. And rather interesting the way he was identified, Hugh.
Well, it turned out that Mother, Mary Trumbull, had a brother in Nottingham, England, one Dr. Harper, and he was able to go to the coast of Ireland and actually identify Ike's body. He did that by a unique signet ring that Ike was wearing at the time and was well known to the family. Ike was also carrying a passport, which, interestingly enough, we were able to recover.
Yeah.
And so I think that there was no question about the identification.
And the passport was very different. My passport's a little blue book, and this was a big sheet of paper. And interestingly enough, on that sheet of paper, there's nothing said about going to sell cars. It says he was going to England on electrical business. And that almost makes us wonder if stories were changed to protect the fact that
contraband was aboard the ship.
Or, you know, we'll never know the real story. We have 3 complete different versions of this. But there was a bounty paid, or a reward paid for the recovery of bodies, and the largest amount was paid for American bodies. And you might wonder, why were they paying for bodies? And of course the steamship line wanted to perfect a list of the people who had perished so that the relatives would know for insurance purposes. So although it may sound a little macabre, it was very necessary. He was brought back to Bridgeport for burial and had a huge funeral with all due respect paid to him. During the night of the awful, when the first awful news arrived, his brothers Alexander and Frank were frantically trying to get news for Isaac's soon-to-be widow, who stayed home in seclusion, and they were out trying to get information for her. The scene along the Irish coast at that time was chaos. There was not the communication we have today or the emergency systems we have today, and very little was available for information. He was brought back to Bridgeport for burial, and 2 of the funeral pieces at his funeral were very interesting. One was a huge automobile wheel with a broken spoke, signifying the end of life. And the other was a huge electrical switch, probably one of the ones he had held a patent for, maybe one of the ones that caused the lawsuit. And that was 5 feet high. 1,500 people died with him. And in 1927, the family received the second highest indemnity payment from the German government that was ever paid. So they definitely had grounds for a large settlement. And Mary Harper Trumbull, Isaac's mother, never forgave the Germans.
It's certainly a sad day for the family. Let me kind of wrap up a little bit here with the seventh of the brothers, my grandfather, George Ray Trumbull, and that's Ray, R-E-A, the Scottish spelling of Ray.
And that name, again, is all through these names.
Oh, absolutely. We see it time and again.
I never saw a family for recycling names. That's the Scottish they didn't
But isn't
speak.
that what you're supposed to do?
Well,
Very confusing for
Well,
genealogists.
yeah, that's true.
it sure did. George Ray was born in '85, as I said, the youngest of the seven brothers, right here in Plainville. And I got to believe it was really tough, being the little guy. He was shown on the far left-hand side here of the family picture, the youngest of this seven brothers.
And you can see in the picture he's a lot younger than the other boys.
Significantly, yes.
Mary had seven sons in 15 years.
Right.
And that's a tremendous output.
Yeah, it was a challenge.
That's
I'm
why
sure.
she didn't smile.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a challenge for Mary, right? George Ray was active in all the family businesses, particularly with the younger brothers. Also had an interesting time in electricity. One of the things he did was he was sent down to Trenton, New Jersey, to run a ceramics factory. Ceramics was very important to electricity in those days.
They made the rosettes out of
Exactly, yes.
We have those at the museum.
And so he was actually in Trenton when my dad, Hugh Trumbull, was born. And so Dad's birth certificate says Trenton, New Jersey. This led into the period where the Bantam Electric Company was now moving to Bridgeport. And the people, as you might imagine, in Bantam weren't real happy about that because it was a lot of jobs. So the people in Bantam prevailed on my grandfather, George Ray, to start another. Now, this is the third Trumbull Electric Company. That company went through a couple of early name changes, but was actually in the same building as the original Connecticut Electric in Bantam, and ultimately became known as the Trumbull Vanderpool Company of Bantam, Connecticut.
And that building's still standing.
That building still stands in the center of Bantam on the main street. Now, would you believe by calling this company Trumbull Vanderpool, it produced a second lawsuit? Not patent infringement this time, but name infringement. So the three older brothers from Plainville took on George Ray Trumbull in another lawsuit, this time because of using the name Trumbull in an electrical devices business.
I wonder if by that time their mother was still inviting them to dinner.
That's a good question. But this same lawyer from Litchfield, Thomas Ryan, entered the scene, won the case. And again, the younger prevailed against the older. The older brothers wound up paying. That was your father.
No, I think that's good.
They wound up paying the court costs and so forth, and eventually settled. My grandfather married Nellie Iona. I love the name Iona. Bunnell, also of Bantam, so local girl. And then my father was named Hugh Homer Trumbull. Hugh after his father, Homer after Homer Bunnell, on his mother's side.
Oh.
So that was Homer, but it was coming from the other side of the family. Now, they had 4 children. My father, Hugh, first, Marjorie, the second, George Ray, the third, and John Harper, the fourth. By the way, talking about recycling names, what do you suppose my son's name is?
We couldn't guess.
Another
huge
Well, guess what my son's name is?
Frank,
Yeah.
and mine is named Hugh. So we the names seem to march on, and I think that's perhaps will take us to a really great family picture. And this is a picture that Martha and Doris and I probably all not only all remember but all treasure because it really shows the entire family. This happened in Pinnacle Rock Farm in July of 1950. And it's just a terrific picture of all of the family. As closing this and kind of wrapping things together, why don't we just kind of quickly walk through this picture?
Actually, we can take quite a bit of time with this and go into some detail. We have what we call the governor's line, or the brothers' line, and we start with Governor John Trumbull, who is very easily recognizable. You'll notice the brothers now are older people. Some of them are not going to be with us too long, but there's John and Maud, his bride of many, many years. Henry and Florence. Florence is his second wife. Henry's looking pretty good in that picture, I think, for a man of his age and his health. Then comes Frank and Dorothy, and of course that's your dad and mother. And then we have Alex and Mary off at the end.
And then your grandmother.
There's no one to represent Ike in this picture, and no one to represent James or Jimmy. But at the end of the the end of the brothers' line there is Mrs. George Trumbull.
My grandmother, right?
Your grandma, yeah. Now, Doris, you've got some folks in there.
Okay, my father is up on the middle with my mother, Dorothy, and then my older sister Gail is down on the corner
In the dark sweater.
in the dark sweater, and I'm right next to her in a white dress, and then my sister Frances is on the other side. And then
And Martha, you've got some folks in there too.
My mom and dad are here,
Okay.
next to John Coolidge.
Next to
and
John Coolidge.
I'm the chubby little one down there
You're
on
the
the bottom.
cute, you're the cute one in the front.
Right.
Yeah.
And John and Florence Coolidge right next to your dad and mother, and their daughter's down in front of them.
And where are you, Hugh?
Well, I'm hiding way up in the top,
Over
on
Maud's
the
head.
left end of the back row. Probably that's the right place for me. And my dad and mother down in front of John and Maud, Hugh and Marjorie. And I have two sisters in the picture down here in the front left corner, Terry Jane and Patricia.
You know, I'm starting to feel really left out of this show. I don't have anybody in the picture. But I can tell you, as a young person, I did a lot of hiking up in there, and it was a beautiful area. I think maybe we can kind of go back and talk a little more about Pinnacle Rock Farm. Did everybody identify all their family now?
Of course, that's the background of this picture. This
Yes.
is all at Pinnacle Rock
This
Farm.
was called the Lodge.
The lodge or
This was
cabin.
going to be they called it a union because we couldn't call it a reunion because this was the first one.
But it was the only one ever
And
held,
is this
right?
the only one
Yeah.
that we had one more in right here in Plainville at a restaurant. Did you go to that
But
one?
nothing at the farm.
No,
I don't think so.
Yeah. When Henry did sell the land off, he sold off all his cows and things, and then it was developed into large houses up there. But he had taken that land from kind of scrap land. Of course, environmentalists will tell you there's no such thing as scrap land, and it was beautiful country. But he had developed it into a farm, and he had thousands of dogwood trees. And in the springtime, it was just a big cloud of white blossoms up there. And if you go down Cook Street today, you'll still see the gates. There's stone pillars there where the gates used to be. And we have pictures at the museum of his cows out in the pasture with the wild roses in blossom, and those little Jersey cows are so beautiful. They look more like deer than cows. They're very gentle and tiny. And he made a wonderful name for Pinnacle Rock Farm, breeding up that herd to such a height of excellence that his cows brought fantastic prices at the auctions. But it must have been extremely sad for him. Do you remember anything about the auction, Martha?
I do. When it was a very sad day for him.
And they had huge tents up there, great big
He did,
tents. Yeah.
He had catalogs, which I have today, photograph albums of the cows, and each one
With
had
the
a
pedigree.
name. And
Yeah, the pedigree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And did you go to the auction?
I was there.
Yeah,
It was,
yeah.
It was
my
very
father went
sad.
to the-
Yeah.
Father went to that.
But it must have been, very sad for Henry, because this had been a venture that was his very own, that he had branched off from the other brothers and done something very different, like your dad with the silver company. And, he reached a point where he couldn't handle it anymore. Kind of sad. And Hugh, do you have any last thoughts on any of these fantastic people?
Well, with 3 electric companies and 2 lawsuits and 7 brothers and
And a stern mother?
all of that, it sure did make an interesting family.
Yes.
And it's been a lot of fun looking into it.
I think the whole thrust of this show was to give people good genealogy basis data for this family, and I think we've accomplished that. I think we've also shown
Well,
maybe a little
I have
humor.
to give you an awful lot of credit because I had never been interested in genealogy until my niece said, I don't know anything about my grandfather. Then, when I discovered Martha Lee, or finally found her after many years, then they sent me over to you, and you have really helped me, because it took me 3 years to do the little piece I did on my father.
It is funny the way, and then you led me to Hugh.
Yes.
And of course,
yes.
I knew
And now
Martha, and I knew her father and mother. But you see, historical societies also profit from these projects, because this material all goes into our files, becomes available to other researchers, and we do have a lot of research.
Well, now if I get my mother's stuff together, and then we compile what we do have, and you have a lot of stuff from your grandfather.
Now you see whether Hugh likes it or not. We're going to have a dynasty when we're finished here. But I think it's particularly interesting also the recycling of the names, and I'm not saying this in a humorous manner. It also is very confusing for genealogists, because there's so
But I
many
thought that's
Hughs
what you were supposed to do. That's why I named my son after my father.
Well, in my family, we use all new, freshly starched names.
I didn't know.
I thought it was an interesting little piece that you had about the boys when they'd go to start the boilers up, and they'd have to go in when they first started Trumbull Electric, and they have to go in and keep the thing going over the weekend. It really was starting from scratch.
Oh, yes.
Really.
And that's the kind of thing you have to do when you're starting a business.
That's right. In those days, there was no help from the town government, no tax rebate, no tax abatement. You went in and you paid your bills and you paid your helpers. And I think that it's interesting, during the Depression, instead of laying people off, they gave everybody a few hours so that every family had a little income.
Yes.
And I think that was perhaps one of the things that they left the town of Plainville a very good feeling about this, and helping the families with food, substance, and wood and so forth during the Depression. They certainly gave a lot to the town, not just in monetary things, but in starting businesses, in starting a beautiful farm, and then branching out into other towns, Bantam, Bridgeport. And of course, the history of the little Trumbull car is amazing.
Right.
I guess.
What did you say about when the Trumbull cars? They wouldn't run very well in the United States, and that's why they were sent to other countries.
See, in other countries, their roads developed slower than ours.
Yeah, they weren't as well developed.
Right. Here we could go into the heavy motor cars, because as cars and bicycles developed, people demanded better roads. The bicycles were very instrumental in getting better roads.
This type of car was better on
an undeveloped road, and that's why almost the whole production was shipped to other countries. Very few of those cars survive today. Very, very few. And we were lucky to borrow those too. And if you all get a chance to, well, you've seen them, and they really are precious. But if you get a chance to see one, they're something extraordinary. They're more like a toy than a car,
Sure.
if you will. And so with all the inventions and patents that these Trumbull boys had to their names, I think that's one of their legacies.
Yes, my father only had 2 patterns when he started, and then he built it up to I don't know, like we've got big, a catalog of all the.
Yeah, I wish that we could get our hands on those patents, because we have all of Charles Norton's patents, and it's very interesting to look through them. So any last thoughts, Martha? You said when you started out you didn't want to do this show, and then you said you were going to do it for your kids.
Right.
And their kids, and their kids.
It's been fun, and you've all done a great job. I've learned a lot.
Just by listening.
Well, I guess that was the whole thing. We've all learned, and Hugh certainly has done an amazing job with his. I have nothing but respect for people that do genealogy research.
Well, he had always been interested in the research. That's why I knew that. That's why I told him, told you to get in touch with him.
Yeah. Well,
He's done a lot of research.
He's been very good about sharing with us, and we with him, and we with you, and hope it continues. And I think that kind of wraps up our look at the Trumbull people, and maybe we'll close this show with revisiting some of the beautiful photographs that we've collected, a little collage of pictures at the end. And I want to thank you all for being here. Martha, you didn't have to travel very far.
No, I didn't.
But it is a busy time of year for you with a holiday coming up.
Right.
And you traveled a ways from Rhode Island. I did get the state right this time. And of course, Hugh traveled from Pennsylvania and came yesterday and was in the building. Well, we were all there doing rehearsals yesterday and rehearsals today. And I guess that's.
Are we going to try and get together again after I get all this information from my mother?
Who knows?
And from you?
We may do a Trumbull Brothers, revisiting the Trumbull Brothers in 2001.
Oh, Lord.
And I think probably that's all that we have to say about the Trumbull brothers. We can finish the show up with some pictures. And thank you all for being with us today.
Thank
and
you, Ruth.
Thank you to
Thank
Nutmeg
you.
TV for making this possible for us. Without Nutmeg TV, we would not be doing these shows. Ruth Hummel closing out another segment of Plainville Now and Then. Thanks for being with us.